Welcome everyone to the Tribal Justice System Infrastructure Program Performance Measures Training. We'd like to welcome our grantees and any program team members. At the end of this training, you should walk away with a better understanding of why BJA requires you to report performance measures and how we use this information. During the training, you'll get an in-depth review of the Tribal Justice System Infrastructure Program's specific reporting requirements as we go through the Performance Measures Questionnaire. After I've reviewed the purpose of the measures and walked you through the questions, I'll turn it over to one of our TTA Help Desk specialists to review how you'll be reporting these items in the PMT system. Performance management is a process that leverages ongoing data collection to determine whether a program is implementing activities as intended and achieving its desired goals and objectives. Using performance measures that capture inputs, outputs, and outcomes over time, performance management enables pre- and post-comparisons that can be used to assess change. For more information, we invite you to visit the OJP Grant Performance Measurement and Progress Reporting Information Portal at ojp.gov/performance. Performance management helps BJA and its grantees understand their progress towards key goals and objectives. We use performance measures to 1. Identify successes and opportunities for improvement, 2. To track grant activity and progress to inform decision making, and 3. Understand funding decisions and their impact on a strategic plan, and lastly 4. Because it's required to comply with the Government Performance and Results Modernization Act. This slide shows a few examples of the kind of reports we generate from the performance measures data that you report. Both of these screenshots show the front pages of annual program reports that use quantitative and qualitative performance data to provide a high-level summary of grantee activity and achievement at the program level. These types of reports are posted on the BJA website and are shared with a variety of audiences, including OJP and BJA leadership, Congress, as well as the general public. Performance measures are as useful to you as the grantee as they are for us here at BJA. Performance measures are developed with input from a variety of stakeholders, including grantees, and are directly related to the requirements of your grant award. They help us understand each of your projects so we can help you continue to improve them over the life of your award by providing targeted training and technical assistance. So the first page of each performance measure questionnaire outlines additional resources that may be helpful as you report. It includes reminders about the program's goals and objectives and lists contact information for the BJA PMT Help Desk and state policy advisors if you need to reach out with any questions. We'd like to note each program's goals and objectives as a reminder of why we're asking you to fill out this questionnaire each quarter. We also have a reporting tip here on this slide. And these reporting tips may appear throughout the presentation where we think there is additional information that can help clarify any PMT reporting. And this one here highlights that some grantees find it easier to track the required data outside of the PMT in smaller time increments, sometimes by the week or by the month. And then you can add it all together when it is time to report in the PMT so that you can get your reporting period totals. We strongly encourage you to use whatever approach makes it easiest for you to report your totals each reporting period. You will be asked to log into the PMT 4 times each year to report on your activity during the 3 months prior to submitting that report. We will go through these questions one by one to ensure that you understand your reporting requirements. And so with that, we'll go ahead and dive in to review the measures. Remember, if you have any questions, you're welcome to use the chat box to send them as we go along, or you can save them until the end of the presentation. For this program, there are 3 different types of grantees. We have Category 1, which are planning grantees, Category 2, which is for the renovation of existing facilities, and Category 2 also as well is considered new construction grantees. A lot of the performance measures for this program are are milestone-based, which means that we track your progress across time throughout the award. So we'll go right now through Category 1. This is the planning of correctional facilities. As you can see here, there are 4 different columns. The first one shows you the number of the question. The second one is the performance measure. And then we also provide a definition for you. And then we have in the last column the data that the grantee reports. The data that the grantee reports tends to be pretty similar throughout most of these questions, so I won't go in depth on that column. But you could indicate whether or not this measure has been completed, not yet complete, not applicable, or if not yet complete, we ask you to please explain so you can provide some additional text information. So for planning grantees, the first question asks if you've had a project manager appointed, and there you can also see that we have a recommended timeline for when this activity should be done. And for this question, it's within 1 to 3 months after the start of your award. The second question asks if there has been a project team created. The third question asks you identify what assistance will be needed, and the recommended time period for that is also 1 to 3 months. Question 4 asks if you've attended the Pacific Training Workshop. 5 asks if you've hired a consultant. Question 6 asks if you have a community profile review. 7 asks if there has been a tribal justice system resources review. Question 8 asks if there has been an other community resources review. Question 9 asks if there has been a justice system case processing review. And question 10 asks if there has been a justice system data review, and there's a different recommended time period here where that's 6 to 12 months. Question 11 asks if there has been a detention or corrections bed needs forecast completed. 12 asks if there's been a justice system goals and objectives that have been identified. 13 asks for the definition of justice facility to be developed. Question 14 asks if space has been developed for the program. 15 asks if the facility's operational program developed. 16 asks for the facility design concept developed. 17 asks for the preliminary project budget developed. 18 asks for the estimated operations and staffing budget if it's been developed. Question 19 asks if you have identified and considered any potential funding sources. Question 20 asks if you have submitted your master plan to your BJA grant manager. And then question 21 asks if there was a comprehensive master plan submitted, and this is a yes/no question. So we'll move on to category 2A, and this is for renovation grants. And the setup for these questions is very similar to the planning, where you have the question number, the performance measure, definitions to help aid you in answering this question, as well as the data that grantee reports. And once again, this is asking if you've completed it, if it's not yet complete, if it's not applicable to your grant program, and then the option there that if this question has not yet been completed, that activity, we ask for you to please explain in more detail as to why not. So the first question here for renovation grantees asks if you have established your total project budget. The second question asks if you've conducted a NEPA review. The third asks if you've developed and distributed an RFP for architecture and engineering services. The fourth question asks if you've reviewed and evaluated architecture and engineering submissions. Question 5 asks if you've interviewed a short list of architecture and engineering firms. 6 asks if you've selected and retained those an A&E firm. 7 asks if you've appointed a project manager. Question 8 asks if you've completed your schematic design. 9 asks if you've developed, revised, and submitted staffing and operations budget. 10 asks if you've submitted that staffing and operations budget. Question 11 asks if you've submitted 20% of design documents to BJA, OFMC, and DSRM for review. 12 asks if you've submitted 70% of those design documents. Question 13 asks if you've submitted 99% of those design documents. Question 14 asks if you've completed your renovation documents. 15 asks if you've solicited bids from construction or renovation company. 16 asks if you have awarded the contract to the selected construction and renovation company. 17 asks if you've commenced a renovation. 18 asks if you've completed 25% of that renovation. 19 if you've completed 50%. Question 20 if you've completed 75% of that renovation. 21 asks if the renovation is substantially complete. 22 asks if you've developed a checklist or a punch list. 23 asks if the punch list is complete. 24 asks if the building commissioning has been completed. 25 asks for the building final completion. 26 asks if you have obtained a certificate of occupancy. 27 asks if you've conducted the facility shakedown. And then we move into the second part of Category 2, and this is for new construction grants. And these questions are quite similar to what we have found in the other Category 2 renovation awards, but we'll walk through them together. Question 1 asks if you've confirmed the site and obtained clearances. The second question asks if the facility master plan has been validated. 3 asks if you have established a total project budget. 4 asks if you've conducted the NEPA review. 5 asks if you've submitted your environmental assessment to BJA. 6 asks if you've developed and distributed a request for proposals, so RFPs for architecture and engineering services. 7 asks if you've reviewed and evaluated those A&E submissions. 8 is if you've interviewed the short list of A&E firms. 9 asks if you've selected and retained an A&E firm. 10 asks if you've had a project manager that's been appointed. 11 asks if you've formed a transition team. 12 asks if you've completed the schematic design. 13 asks if you've developed, revised, or submitted your staffing and operations budget. 14 asks if you've submitted staffing and operations budget. 15 is if you've commenced your design development. 16 asks if you've submitted 20% of those design documents to BJA, OFMC, and DSRM for review. 17 asks if you've submitted 70% of those design documents. 18 asks if you submitted 99% of those design documents. 19 asks if you've finished your construction documents. 20 asks if you've solicited bids from construction companies. 21 asks if you have a contract with a construction company. 22 asks if you have commenced construction. And then 23 through 25 give different percentages on whether or not that construction is complete at 25%, 50%, and 75%. And then 26 asks if you have, if the building has substantially been completed. 27 asks if the construction is complete and you have developed the punch list. 28 asks if the punch list has been completed. 29 asks if the building commissioning has been completed. And then 30 asks if the building is near final completion. 31 asks if you've obtained that certificate of occupancy. 32 if you've conducted your facility shakedown. 33 asks if you have commenced occupancy and initial operations. And so next we'll briefly go over the narrative questions. And these narrative questions are reported on semi-annually in the PMT. And these tend to incorporate qualitative data. The first question asks for your accomplishments within the reporting period. And when you're answering these questions, remember that the reporting period covers a 6-month period, since these are asked semi-annually. Question 2 asks what goals were accomplished as they relate to your grant application. 3 asks if you've had any problems or barriers that you encountered within the reporting period that prevented you from reaching your goals or your milestones. Question 4 asks if there's any assistance that BJA can provide to address any problems or barriers identified in question 3. And this is so we can help direct TTA resources for you. Question 5 asks if you are on track to fiscally and programmatically complete your program as outlined in your grant application. And you can answer yes, no, and if no, then you would provide an explanation. Question 6 asks for what major activities are planned for the next 6 months. Question 7 asks, based on your knowledge of the criminal justice field, are there any innovative programs or accomplishments that you'd like to share with us? Question 8 asks for the number of rehabilitation-based programs implemented or enhanced based on facility renovation or construction. And we have some additional information here about if you have any treatment programs implemented or enhanced, vocational assistance programs, or alternative educational programs. And then we ask for the number of those things for the project period. So we ask for the number of treatment programs, the number of vocational assistance programs, the number of alternative education programs, the number of family reunification programs, the number of pretrial services, probation services, physical health services, and then any other number of other types of rehabilitation-based programs. You would input that information here. And then question 9 asks for the types of community-based options that were created, and this is part of a larger list. And you can see the first two here, which is community-based options and day reporting center. And so we ask that you check all that apply. If you have transitional housing, halfway housing, residential facilities for nonviolent juveniles adjudicated guilty by a court, if you have any day reporting centers, any pretrial services or programs, probation or parole programs, treatment programs, or any other that you would like to share. So at this point, I'd like to hand the presentation over to my Training and Technical Assistance team representative, and thank you so much for your attention.
All right, so thank you all for joining today's presentation. So we will now transition to the system portion of the presentation. So first, I'm going to go over the different types of performance measures that are in the PMT questionnaire. Afterwards, I will cover the reporting schedule, and then finally, we'll go over the system navigation and the different features of the performance measurement tool. So let's get started. So first, I'd like to go over some commonly used terms within the PMT, and we will frequently refer to these terms throughout the remainder of today's session. So the PMT uses specific terminology to refer to persons, organizations, and concepts. A grantee is the primary recipient of a federal award from BJA, and this is the organization who submits an application to BJA for federal grant funding. A grant or your award is the funding that is given to grantees by BJA. A subrecipient is the secondary recipient of a federal award, which they receive from a primary grantee. And the data that a subrecipient organization enters in the PMT will be reviewed by the primary grantee. The project description is a description of the BJA-funded project that serves as the basis of the grant application. The project description details the purpose of the project and funding. A reporting period is the period of time in which BJA-funded activities were conducted and funds were expended and obligated. Reporting periods for the BJA PMT consist of 3 months reporting periods, also called quarters. So let's use an example to cover some of that information. The PMT, Department of Justice, submitted a grant application so they could receive funding from BJA. Once their application is approved, they are now a grantee. They use some of the money they receive from BJA, which is also their grant, to fund their project activities, and then they use the remaining part of their grant to fund a local law enforcement organization. The local law enforcement organization is now considered a subrecipient of the PMT Department of Justice. The outline of the BJA-funded activities that will be conducted by both the grantee and subrecipient should be captured in the grantee's project description, and that would be found in the grant application. And finally, the data collected by the grantee and subrecipient should be reported for each quarterly reporting period that the grant is active. As mentioned in the earlier part of the training, the questions in the PMT are made up of 2 main categories. The first is the quantitative program performance measures. This is where you enter the numeric data you collected over the course of the reporting period. An example of this question could be, how many dollars were spent on law enforcement equipment during this reporting period? The second section are the qualitative narrative questions. These questions are open-ended and do not require a numeric response, although you can provide one. The narrative questions that are answered during the April to June and October to December reporting periods fall into this category. An example of this type of question could be, what type of equipment was purchased with BJA funding during this reporting period, or what challenges did you face in completing your program goals during this reporting period? Remember that these questions are meant to capture the full experience that you have with conducting activities with BJA funds, so the more information that you provide, the better. The quantitative data you report is used to establish baselines, track performance against program goals, and create a nationwide picture of numeric data for BJA. The narrative questions give grantees a chance to express in their own words how their experience has been conducting program activities with BJA funding. Both of these categories are equally important for your reporting, and so you should take every possible measure to ensure the accuracy and integrity of your data. Next, we will go over the specific types of reports that are generated in the PMT. As you know, the PMT collects data for a 3-month period of activity, which is also called a reporting period. You will have 30 days after the close of the reporting period to enter data into the PMT. And after you complete your data entry, the PMT system, will prompt you to create a report of this information. Every 6 months, grantees are required to upload a semi-annual report into the Grants Management System, also known as GMS, and that report is also generated from the PMT. The semi-annual report will be uploaded as an attachment to your progress report in GMS and is due once in January and once in July. And those semi-annual reports contain the narrative questions that we talked about the past couple of slides. Closeout or final reports should only be completed once all grant funding has been expended, and that is also uploaded into GMS. As a reminder, all of these reports are always available in the PMT for you to create and save as many times as needed. And you should also keep in mind that BJA does review grantees' report status and data every quarter to ensure validity and compliance with reporting requirements, so it is vital to fulfill every reporting requirement your agency has in accordance with your grant. This is the reporting schedule that details the time frame for each reporting period, the type of data that's required, and the due dates for submitting it in the PMT and GMS. You will enter program performance measures every quarter and enter the narrative section twice a year during the April to June and October to December reporting periods. This table can be found in the PMT on the Information and Resources page as well, which we will cover in a few slides. As a reminder, now's a good time to note that the PMT is accessible year-round for data review, report generation, account creation, and more, but data entry is only scheduled for the month following the close of a reporting period based on the scheduled PMT due date. If you need to edit any data outside of those scheduled due dates, you will need to contact the BJA PMT Help Desk, whose contact information will be listed at the end of today's presentation. So now let's get into the specific functions of the performance measurement tool. So what exactly is the PMT? The PMT, as commonly referred, is the performance measurement tool, which is the online data collection tool for Office of Justice Programs grant recipients. It is structured as an online questionnaire and is available year-round. The PMT does contain lots of information and tools to assist you in your reporting, so let's take a look at what we have to offer. Here are the sections that we will be covering for the rest of today's presentation, which range from creating a profile to creating a report. And again, as a reminder, the BJA PMT Help Desk contact information will be available at the end of today's presentation. So if you have any questions, you can direct that to those people over there. To access the performance measurement tool, visit the PMT single sign-on page at ojpsso.ojp.org. The single sign-on page allows multiple OJP grant recipients to access all of their awards using one username and password. So, for example, if your organization receives funding from both BJA and the Office of Victims of Crime, you can log in with one username and password and access both of those applications. The point of contact listed for each federal award that's in the grants management system is also considered the primary point of contact in the performance measurement tool, and they will be the person who has first contact with the PMT system. If this person is not already a registered PMT user, they will receive an email from the PMT with instructions on how to create a new account when contact information is updated in the PMT. Once the point of contact has set up their account, they can add additional users who will also receive a registration link as well to create their own unique account. Once your unique account is created, enter your registered email address as your username along with your password to log in. Here's an example of the email new users will receive when their account is created, and to set up your new user account, just click on the link in the email. The password that you will then create is based on OJP security requirements and is similar to the policy used by other DOJ sites such as GMS. Passwords must be at least 12 characters and contain one uppercase letter, one lowercase letter, one number, and one special character. If you request to have your password reset, you will not be able to use the same password as the one you used before. On the home page, you can update your account information by clicking on the corresponding links. And once you have verified that all of your account information is accurate and up to date, select BJA PMT to continue. The first profile page of the PMT displays the various awards your organization or you as an individual receive from a particular OJP program. If your organization receives funds from various sources within BJA, you will have access to multiple profiles. The picture on the slide depicts an organization who receives funding directly from BJA, which makes them a grantee, and who also receives funding from a separate grantee, so that would make them a sub-grantee. To continue, to enter or edit data, select the grantee or sub-grantee profile you want to report on by clicking on the plus sign and then the corresponding organization's name. As a note, you will not see this page if you only have one PMT profile or award, but instead you will be brought right into the performance measurement tool. If you are logging into the PMT for the first time, the system will direct you to the profile page. All of the information on the profile page comes from the grants management system, and if any of it is incorrect, please be sure to contact the GMS Help Desk and submit a grants adjustment notice to update your contact information. After you do that, you should also be sure to contact the PMT Help Desk of all the changes that you've made so that we have accurate contact information as well. Having accurate contact information listed in the PMT is important so that your organization will receive email updates, reminders, notices, and other necessary user materials as it relates to your grant. If others within your organization also need access to the PMT, you can access the profile page and then select Manage Users to add another user. As a reminder, you should only add users who will need access to either review or edit data, as the system will automatically send that person an email. If you are a returning user, you will be directed to the Information and Resources page upon logging in. This page, as we mentioned earlier, gives you access to important documents regarding your program, such as a user guide, a list of frequently asked questions, a copy of your program's performance measures, and any program updates. Keep in mind that you can access the Profile and Information and Resources page at any time while you are logged in the PMT. At this time is a good point to remind users that the PMT will time you out after 30 minutes of inactivity, so you should be sure to press the Save button whenever it is available so that your data is not erased. Additionally, users should be sure not to use the back or forward button on their web browser, as that will produce system errors, but instead use the buttons within the PMT to navigate within the system. Reporting in the PMT is based on grant activity funded or supported by a federal award number. If you have multiple BJA grants or awards that are active at the same time, it is recommended and preferred that you close out one grant before the other one becomes operational. If there is any overlap between multiple awards where they are both active and supporting the same services and activities, your data should be prorated based on the percentage of grant funding. So please do not duplicate your data. To begin the data entry process, go to the Federal Awards page. Its purpose is to give an overview of all data entry for all of your awards, both past and present. To continue in your data entry process, click the red Begin Reporting Process button next to the reporting period and award number for which you want to begin entering data. Before we get into the specifics of PMT data entry, it is important to understand the different statuses on the Federal Awards page so that you are aware of where your agency is in the reporting process. If a grantee has not opened their report or saved any data, the PMT will mark the report as not started. If a grantee has opened their report and begun data entry, but has not completed the questionnaire in its entirety, the PMT will mark the report as in progress. If a grantee has entered, saved, and completed every question in the report, the PMT will mark the record as complete. Non-operational applies to grantees that indicated there was not grant-funded activity and no funds were expended during the 3-month reporting period. If a report is marked as non-operational, the PMT does recognize it as complete, and the grantee will not need to answer program performance measurement questions. Grantees who have subrecipients will also be affected by their subrecipients report status as well. So for example, if a grantee has completed their portion of the PMT, but their subrecipient is still in progress, the overall status of their report shown on the grantee's Federal Awards page will also say in progress. Thus, it is important to encourage all grant recipients, both at the grantee and subgrantee level, to complete their report in a timely fashion. If you don't have any subrecipients, you can proceed with your data entry process as usual. Once you click Begin Reporting Process on the Federal Awards page, you'll be brought to the Award Administration page. The purpose of the Award Administration page is to inform BJA about how you are administering your funds. On this page, grantees can indicate whether they use the funds all themselves, whether their subgrantees use all their funds, or whether their funds are split between the grantee organization and subgrantee organization. In addition, the PMT will also ask whether this is the last reporting period of data you have to report. Select No to create a quarterly report and select Yes to create a final PMT report. The final report is the last report you will generate in the PMT, so grantees should only select a final report if all of their grant funds have been expended prior to the last day of the reporting period. Otherwise, select No to continue with your normal quarterly report. Next, you will be brought to the grant activity page. The first question asked every quarter or reporting period is whether there is grant activity. If you answer yes, you will be prompted to answer the program performance measures. If you indicated there was not grant activity, you will not be prompted to answer the program performance measures, but you will need to give a reason about why no activity occurred instead. And if you indicated there was not grant activity, your data entry status will show as non-operational, and as mentioned, non-operational is considered complete, but it means that no funds were expended. And then now's a good time, now that we're in the data entry portion of the presentation, that not all grantees reports will appear in the way that's shown on the slide, as this is just an example, but the data entry process is largely the same across the platform. So to continue in your data entry process, press the Save and Continue button shown at the bottom of the page. Once you've indicated that there was program activity, the PMT will then generate the program questionnaire. This screenshot is just an example of what the tabs may look like once your program is operational, and it will vary depending on what your program is set up, how your program is set up. Here on this page, you will enter responses to each one of your program's performance measures, and you must enter a response for all required fields to move forward. If a question does not apply to your program and you're not able to skip it, or if you're unable to provide a value, you may enter a 0 to show that the question is not applicable to you. However, you will need to explain those 0 values, and I'll show you how to do that further on in the presentation. Some sections of the PMT also include skip questions, which determine if you will need to answer additional questions or skip a section of questions entirely. If you need to answer the additional questions, they will expand in an accordion-style fashion. If not, no questions will appear and you can proceed with your data entry session. The goals and objectives section also consists of several questions in which you can elaborate on your program for the reporting period. This section also can be shown as the narrative section or the project progress section. So as a caveat, similar to before, if it doesn't look exactly like the way shown on the screen, please don't worry, that's perfectly fine. The note on the screen reminds you that when entering data for the April to June and October through December reporting periods, regardless of your grant activity, you will have to answer the narrative questions, and you have up to 5,000 characters for your response. On the narrative section page, you should remember not to enter N/A or not applicable for those questions, as we have found that grantees usually have their reports returned to them for editing if they ignore these questions. And at the help desk, we would advise that you enter 2 to 3 sentences for each one of these questions. So on the Goals and Objectives tab, or the Project Progress tab, or the Narrative section, you will have options on how to report. You can add new goals and entries or delete them by using the corresponding buttons. And once you finish that section, you can move on to the activity portion if that's available to you. Finish answering questions for that particular section. At the end of your data entry session, you'll be asked to review your data, and you do that on the review page. The review page allows you to view any required questions that need to be answered and breaks down the measures by category, question, option, your response, and an alert if you missed any required question. To view a specific question or response on the review page, type it into the search bar. If you skipped a required question, you will see a red not answered warning at the top of the review page with the number of measures you have left to answer. A blue required hyperlink will also appear next to the questions that you missed and will take you directly to the question if you click on the link. You can also use the Go Back to Data Entry Form button to return to your questionnaire if you have any revisions you need to make. If you are done with all of your data entry for the reporting period and have reviewed all of your data, you are ready to mark your report as complete. To do so, check the Mark Data as Complete box at the bottom of the review page. On this page, users have the option to provide additional comments that we mentioned earlier, which can be used to clarify some of your data or explain 0 values if you provided that. Once you check the box and press Save, your data will be locked and you will not be able to make any edits without contacting the BJA PMT Help Desk. So please be sure that your data entry is final and accurate before checking that box and pressing Save. If you need to edit a report that has been submitted, you will need to contact the Help Desk. And so once you press the Save button, congratulations. You have successfully completed your data entry and you are ready to generate your report. After you select the Mark Data as Complete button and save your report, you'll be asked if you want to create a GMS report. And again, this is just for training purposes. If your PMT system does not look like the one shown on the slide, don't worry. However, the steps are largely the same. So after you select Create a GMS Report, a new window will appear with your report on the page. You should select the red Export as a PDF file button to generate a copy of your report as a PDF. You should save the report onto your computer for record keeping, or if it is during the April to June or October to December reporting periods, save the report so that you can upload it as an attachment to your semi-annual progress reports due in the grants management system in July and January of each year. After you have saved your GMS report to your computer, you should return to your federal awards page on which you can review the status of all of your awards. They should appear as completed and created, which is confirmation that you have finished your data entry. Next, you can log out of the PMT and then prepare you and your organization for the next round of performance measures, data collection, and reporting. During that time, you may also want to check in with your grant manager to determine if you have other reporting requirements as well. Now I'm going to go over a few frequently asked questions and helpful hints for your PMT reporting. So sometimes grantees will report that they have encountered an error message within the PMT. So again, as a reminder, you should not use the back or forward buttons on your web browser. You should also be sure to follow the instructions laid out in this presentation and follow the indicators in the PMT so that no wires are being crossed within the system. If your error message persists, you can always give the PMT help desk a call and we'd be happy to troubleshoot with you. Sometimes grantees will report that they've lost their data. So again, the PMT will time you out after 30 minutes of inactivity, in which event your data will be erased. So to avoid having to re-enter all of your data, press the save button whenever you see it available or when you're going to another screen or leaving your machine. If you have a particular question about a measure, the PMT does offer instructions on measures that are underlined in blue. So if you click on those measures or hover over those measures, the system will offer further instructions on how to respond to that question. In the event that you need to edit a report that you've already submitted, you will need to contact the BJA PMT Help Desk, whose contact information will be shown on the next slide. If you need to update your contact information in the PMT, you should be sure that you obtain a grant adjustment notice if that's necessary in the event that you have a point of contact change, and then notify the PMT Help Desk and we'll get that done for you. If you see a red button in PMT, that is an indicator of an action required on the next page. So whenever you see a red button, select the red button and the PMT will take you to the next step in order to complete your report. And as promised, here is the BJA PMT Help Desk contact information. Our office hours are Monday through Friday, 8:30 a.m. through 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, except for U.S. federal holidays, during which we are closed. We strive to return everybody's email and phone call within 24 hours, so please don't hesitate to leave a voicemail or email even after business hours. We will now leave the webinar open for about 5 to 10 minutes so that you can download any handouts that will be attached in the file transfer window, or if you have any questions, you can use the chat or Q&A box to ask those questions. And so a recording of today's training will also be posted online in the future. And now at this time, on behalf of the BJA and PMT team, we'd like to thank you for your time, dedication, and your hard work. And that concludes today's presentation.